Tonight, as you tuck yourself in and let your mind wander, consider this gentle truth. Innovation doesn't rush into our lives like a sudden storm, but settles in slowly, like the quiet turning of seasons. From the first cautious hands tending a small flame to those now reaching toward artificial intelligence, humanity has always learned to adapt at its own peaceful pace. Let this journey soothe you as you drift towards sleep. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine being there, deep in a dark cave, perhaps 500,000 years ago. The world outside is cold, filled with the cries of animals you cannot always see. Inside, there is only darkness and a deep, profound quiet. Then a spark. It's a tiny, chaotic flicker, born from the friction of stone against stone, or perhaps a lucky strike of flint. For a creature that lives in perpetual fear of the dark, this is more than just light. It is a revelation. This is our story, not of invention, but of adaptation. The first time a human hand, or the hand of a being so very close to us, reached out not to flee from fire, but to tend to it, to feed it, to keep it alive. This was our first great technological leap. Not the creation of fire itself, for lightning and volcanoes had been doing that for eons. No, our leap was in the mind. It was the adaptation from seeing fire as a terrifying force of destruction to understanding it as a tool, as a companion in the deepening night. Think of that transition for a moment. It's like learning a new language, the language of flame. You must listen to its crackle, watch the way it dances, learn what it hungers for, dry grass, twigs, certain kinds of wood. You must learn its rhythm, or it will abandon you, leaving you once more in the cold and the dark. Mastering fire required a new kind of patience, a new kind of foresight. It demanded planning. You couldn't just find fire, you had to carry it. You had to become its guardian. This changed us, in our very bones and in the pathways of our brains. The security of a constant hearth allowed for longer nights, safer gatherings. The darkness, which had once meant vulnerability, now became a time for story, for connection huddled around that warm, living light. The flickering flames painted shadows on the cave walls, perhaps planting the very first seeds of imagination, of art, of wondering about the shapes in the dark. And as we learned to speak to fire, our hands were busy with another, quieter revolution. If fire was our first great energy source, then stone was our first true material. Pick up a smooth river stone. It feels solid, passive. But somewhere in the mind of an ancient ancestor, a connection was made. If I strike this stone at just the right angle, with just the right force, it will not just break, it will fracture in a predictable way. it will release a sharp edge hidden inside like a secret. The creation of the first simple stone tool, a chopper or a sharp flake, wasn't just about making something useful. It was about seeing potential where others saw only a rock. It was about holding an intention in your mind, I need to cut, and then manipulating the physical world to fulfill that intention through a series of precise, learned actions. This is a profound cognitive adaptation. It requires what we might call a mental template. You're not just randomly bashing rocks together. You have a finished product in your mind's eye before the first strike. You have to plan the sequence of strikes, understand the geometry of the stone, and have the fine motor control to execute it. It's a form of externalized thinking. The tool becomes an extension of your own body and your own mind. Your hand is weak, but the sharp edge of the flint can tear through hide. Your teeth are blunt, but the stone can smash bone to reach the nutritious marrow inside. With these tools, we began to reshape our relationship with the world around us. We were no longer just foraging creatures, limited by what our bodies could gather or scavenge. We became active shapers of our environment, able to process food, to defend ourselves, to modify our surroundings in new ways. Now, imagine the synergy of these two adaptations, fire and stone working together. The stone tool lets you process more food, and the fire transforms it. Tough, fibrous roots become edible. Meat, which could spoil quickly and carry parasites, becomes safe, cooked, and easier to digest. This is not just a culinary upgrade, it's a biological revolution. The energy our bodies once spent on digesting raw, tough food for hours was suddenly liberated. Some scientists believe this cooked diet provided a massive boost of accessible energy that may have literally fueled the growth of our energy-hungry brains. The technology changed our biology. We adapted to our tools, and our tools in turn adapted us. These technologies also began to weave the fabric of our social world in new patterns. Making sophisticated stone tools isn't something everyone could do instantly. It took skill, practice, knowledge passed down from one person to another. This created the first specialists, the first teachers and apprentices, and the hearth, the fire, became the center of this new social universe. It was the place where the day's work ended, where the group gathered, where food was shared. It was warm, bright, and safe. Conversation could flow. Knowledge could be passed along not just about tool making, but about the land, the animals, the seasons, and the stars. The technology created a new kind of space, a social and cognitive space where culture could take root and grow. So as you drift, picture this scene not as a dramatic event, but as a slow, gentle dawn. A group of early humans, their faces lit by the gentle dancing light of a fire they have learned to keep. One of them is patiently, rhythmically striking a stone, teaching a younger one the angle, the sound of a good strike. They are not just surviving the night, they are building a world within it. They are laying the neural and social foundations for everything that would follow. The firelight reflects in their eyes, and in that reflection is the glimmer of curiosity, of control, of a partnership with the elements that would carry their descendants to the ends of the earth. This ancient dance with flame and stone set a pattern that we would follow for millennia. We learn to see potential. We build a mental model. We shape the external world. And in doing so, we are quietly, profoundly reshaped from within. And as the embers of that first great technological age glowed, a new question began to smolder in the human mind. A question about stillness and settlement, and what might happen if we stopped following the food and instead convinced the food to follow us. Imagine, if you will, a landscape that was once familiar but is now changing in ways that would transform humanity forever. After thousands of years as wanderers, hunters and gatherers moving with the seasons, following the migrations of animals and the ripening of wild fruits, something subtle began to shift in our ancestors' relationship with the land. It wasn't a sudden revolution, but rather a slow, patient turning, like the earth itself gradually warming to the spring sun. This was the dawn of agriculture, a technology so fundamental that it would reshape not just how we lived, but how we thought about time, community, and our place in the natural world. Picture for a moment the first tentative attempts at cultivation. Perhaps it began with simple observation, noticing that certain plants grew better in particular spots, that seeds scattered near a campsite might sprout when you returned the next season. It might have been a woman tending a patch of wild grasses, or a family returning year after year to a fertile valley where the soil was rich and water abundant. These early cultivators weren't farmers in the way we imagine them today. They were part-time gardeners, still hunting and gathering, but with one foot planted in a new way of being. The technology of agriculture began with the simplest of tools, a digging stick to break the soil, a sharpened stone to cut stalks, a basket woven from reeds to carry the harvest. But these humble implements represented something profound, a decision to work with the land rather than simply take from it. Think of that digging stick as humanity's first contract with the earth. We would tend the soil, and the soil would tend to us. It was a partnership that required patience and observation, learning the rhythms of growth, the needs of different plants, the secrets of soil and season. As communities settled in one place, their relationship with technology deepened. They needed ways to store their harvests, to protect their crops from animals and weather, to manage water in times of drought or flood. This led to one of the most elegant innovations in human history: irrigation. Imagine a community living near a river, watching the annual floods bring life-giving silt to their fields. Someone has the idea to dig a small channel to guide that water where it's most needed. Another person builds a simple dam of earth and stones. Year by year, these channels become more sophisticated, a network of waterways spreading across the landscape like veins carrying lifeblood to the land. Irrigation transformed agriculture from a gamble with nature to a more predictable partnership. It allowed people to grow crops in places that would otherwise be too dry, to produce surpluses that could feed more people, to create food security in an uncertain world. Think of those early irrigation systems as humanity's first attempts to have a conversation with the landscape, to listen to the land's needs and respond with careful engineering. With settlement came another profound change: our relationship with time. For nomadic peoples, time flowed in cycles. The migration of animals, the ripening of fruits, the turning of seasons. But for agricultural communities, time took on a new dimension. There were planting seasons and harvest times, periods of waiting and working, moments of intense labor followed by quieter times. People began to mark time by agricultural events: the first rains, the flowering of crops, the gathering of the harvest. They developed calendars based on the movements of sun and moon, aligning their activities with celestial rhythms. This new sense of time was more than practical. It shaped how communities organized themselves, how they planned for the future, how they understood their place in the cosmos. The technology of agriculture also transformed our social structures. When you're tied to a piece of land, you build more permanent homes. You create storage for grain, shelters for animals, workshops for tools. Villages grow into towns, and communities develop hierarchies and specializations. Some people focus on farming, others on pottery, weaving, or tool making. With food surpluses, not everyone needs to be directly involved in food production. This allowed for the emergence of artisans, priests, leaders, people who could devote their time to other pursuits. Think of an early farming village as a living organism, with each person playing a specialized role, all connected by the common goal of sustaining the community through the agricultural cycle. Perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of this transition was how it changed our relationship with the plants and animals we depended on. Through careful selection over generations, early farmers transformed wild grasses into domesticated grains like wheat, barley, and rice. They selected seeds from plants with desirable traits: larger grains, stronger stalks, easier harvesting. In doing so, they were engaging in a slow, collaborative dance with nature, guiding evolution toward forms that served human needs. Similarly, wild animals became domesticated companions: goats, sheep, cattle, pigs, providing not just meat but milk, wool, leather, and labor. This relationship was mutual. Humans provided protection and food. Animals provided resources and assistance. It was a co-evolution, a partnership that transformed both species. The psychological impact of agriculture cannot be overstated. When your survival depends on crops growing in a specific place, you develop a deep attachment to that land. You learn its moods, its qualities, its secrets. You pass down knowledge from generation to generation: when to plant, how to rotate crops, which plants grow well together. This knowledge becomes part of a community's identity, woven into stories, rituals, and traditions. Think of an agricultural community's knowledge as a living library, stored not in books but in the collective memory of the people, in the rhythms of their work, in the songs they sing during planting and harvest. Agriculture also brought new challenges and anxieties. Now there were crops that could fail, stores that could be raided, land that could be claimed by others. People had to defend their fields, manage conflicts over resources, develop systems of ownership and inheritance. The very stability that agriculture promised also created new vulnerabilities. A drought, a flood, a pest infestation could threaten an entire community's survival in ways that were different from the risks faced by nomadic hunters. This led to another layer of technological adaptation: the development of granaries to store surplus, walls to protect settlements, systems of trade to exchange goods with other communities. If we think of technology as an extension of human capability, then agriculture was perhaps our first great extension into the realm of systems thinking. It required understanding complex relationships between soil and water, between season and crop, between human labor and natural processes. It demanded planning across seasons and years, cooperation across families and generations. The agricultural calendar became a shared framework that organized community life from planting to harvest, from festival to festival. In many ways, the rhythm of agricultural life created the first steady heartbeat of civilization, a pulse that would eventually give rise to cities, states, and empires. But even as communities became more settled, their technological journey was far from over. The surpluses produced by agriculture created space for new kinds of thinking, new forms of expression, new ways of shaping the world. With stable food supplies, people could devote time to activities beyond immediate survival. They could observe the stars more carefully, experiment with materials, develop symbolic systems to record their knowledge and communicate across time and space. The stage was set for humanity's next great leap, one that would capture thoughts in permanent form and shape the very elements of the earth. Let's consider for a moment how we think about memory. You might imagine it as a collection of photographs, perhaps, or a library of stories in your mind. But before writing, human memory was more like a river, a flowing, ever-changing stream that reshaped itself with each telling, each recollection. It was personal, organic, and beautifully imperfect. Then came a revolution that would freeze the river into stone, writing. It began with simple marks, tokens in clay to track grain, etchings to record numbers. But these marks evolved into symbols, and those symbols became the first writing systems: cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs in Egypt. With a stylus or a reed pen, humanity learned to capture thought, to pin down the ephemeral butterfly of language onto a permanent surface. Think of it this way: writing created an external hard drive for the human mind. Our biological memory, magnificent as it is, has limits. We forget, we misremember, we die, and our memories die with us. But writing allowed knowledge to outlive its creator. It could be stored, retrieved, and transmitted across generations without being distorted by the passage of time or the fallibility of human recall. This was not just a new tool. It was a new way of thinking. To write and to read required the development of entirely new cognitive pathways in the brain. We had to learn to decode abstract symbols, to translate squiggles on a surface into complex ideas, narratives, and instructions. It rewired us, and as writing spread, it created new social structures. Literacy became power. The scribe, the priest, the administrator, they held the keys to this new kingdom of recorded knowledge. They could read the laws, interpret the sacred texts, keep the accounts of the state. A new hierarchy emerged, based not solely on strength or lineage, but on access to this coded knowledge. Writing also changed the very nature of knowledge itself. Oral knowledge is communal, flexible, and participatory. A story changes with each teller, adapting to the audience and the moment. Written knowledge is fixed, authoritative, and individual. The text says what it says, and it says the same thing to everyone. This created the possibility of canon, of scripture, of a single unchangeable truth preserved in ink. It allowed for complex bureaucracy, for law codes like Hammurabi's that applied uniformly, for epic poems like Gilgamesh that could be preserved in their exact form. Now let's turn to the second great revolution of this era, one that happened not on the page but in the earth and the fire: metallurgy. For hundreds of thousands of years, we were a Stone Age species. We shaped the world with rocks we could find and flake, but somewhere, someone noticed that certain colorful rocks, when placed in the intense heat of a fire, would weep a strange glowing liquid. And when that liquid cooled, it was hard, yet could be shaped. Copper was likely the first. This was magic, pure and simple. You were taking a stone and, through fire and skill, transforming it into something entirely new. It required a profound shift in understanding. You weren't just finding a tool in nature, you were creating one from raw materials through a controlled transformative process. It was the beginning of true chemistry, of material science. Think of it as the original alchemy. You were taking the mundane, a lump of ore, and through a secret, fiery ritual, turning it into something precious and powerful. This knowledge was specialized and dangerous. It required understanding temperatures, fluxes, molds. It created the first true specialists, the smith. The smith was part chemist, part artist, part mystic. He worked with elemental forces, earth, air, fire, to birth new substances from the ground, and the substances he created changed everything. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was harder and held a sharper edge than any stone. It gave us superior weapons, more durable tools, and beautiful, lasting ornaments. It created wealth that could be hoarded and traded. Just as writing created a hierarchy of knowledge, metallurgy created a hierarchy of wealth and military power. Those who controlled the sources of tin and copper and the knowledge of smelting held immense power. Armies equipped with bronze swords could dominate those with stone axes. This led to the rise of powerful, centralized states, fortified cities, and expansive trade networks spanning continents to secure these vital materials. Together, writing and metallurgy formed a kind of double helix of advancement. Writing allowed for the precise recording and transmission of complex metallurgical recipes and techniques. It turned secret, oral knowledge into a transferable technology. Conversely, metallurgy produced the durable tools, the chisels, the styli, the plates that made more permanent forms of writing possible. They fed each other in a cycle of innovation. These adaptations were not without their costs. They created greater social inequality. They centralized power. They sometimes divorced us from the direct, hands-on knowledge of our hunter-gatherer past. We became people of the text and the tool, increasingly living in a world mediated by our own creations. But they also expanded the horizon of human possibility immeasurably. They gave us history. They gave us engineering. They laid the cognitive and material foundations for everything that was to come. We learned to externalize our minds and to transform our world at its most fundamental, elemental level. And having mastered the art of preserving thought and reshaping matter, humanity stood on the brink of its next great leap. One that would harness not just fire and symbol, but water, steam, and the very laws of motion themselves. As humanity's hands first grasped the lever and understood the fulcrum, we entered an age where we learned to move not just our bodies, but the world itself. The mechanical age began with simple observations, watching a log roll rather than being dragged, noticing that a sloped surface required less effort than lifting directly upward. These were our first conversations with physics, whispers with matter about how energy could be redirected, transformed, and amplified. Think of those early devices, the lever, the pulley, the wheel, as our earliest forms of negotiation with reality. Before them, if we wanted to move a heavy stone, we had to match our strength against its mass. But with a lever, we could place a small piece of wood beneath the stone, find the right balance point, and suddenly our limited strength became enough. It was as if we'd discovered a secret language that allowed us to ask reality for favors, a gentle request to borrow a little physics to help us along. The wheel emerged from this same quiet conversation. Some ancient observer must have noticed that round objects rolled more easily than they slid. The first wheels were likely logs placed beneath heavy loads, but the true innovation came when we realized we could attach them to a stable platform and create something entirely new. This wasn't just about making transportation easier, it was about reimagining movement itself. The wheel transformed distance from something to be endured into something that could be measured, mastered, and eventually mechanized. For centuries, these simple machines worked alongside human and animal labor. Water wheels turned in gentle rivers, harnessing the flow to grind grain. Windmills caught breezes to pump water or turn millstones. These were technologies that worked with natural rhythms rather than against them. They didn't create energy so much as they borrowed it from nature's steady heartbeat. A water wheel is essentially a conversation with a river, asking it to share a little of its momentum to help with human tasks. But then came the real transformation, the moment when we stopped just borrowing energy and learned to create our own. The steam engine emerged not as a sudden invention, but as the culmination of centuries of observation and tinkering. People had noticed steam's power for ages, the way a boiling pot's lid rattled, the way geysers erupted from the earth. The breakthrough came when we learned to control that expansion, to channel it into predictable, useful work. Imagine the first time someone watched a steam engine in action, this massive metal creature breathing out great clouds of white, its pistons moving with a rhythmic certainty that no living creature could match. It must have felt like witnessing magic-made material, like seeing the invisible force of heat and pressure turned into visible, tangible motion. The steam engine was humanity's first true power source that wasn't tied to the immediate present. Not wind blowing now, not water flowing today, but heat that could be generated whenever needed, stored in coal or wood, and released on command. This changed everything about how we perceived physical possibility. Before steam, large-scale work was limited by the collective strength of humans and animals in one place at one time. With steam, a single engine could do the work of hundreds of people tirelessly for as long as its fire burned. Factories transformed from workshops into something entirely new, places where machines did the heavy lifting while humans orchestrated their movements. The relationship between human effort and output shifted fundamentally. Our labor became less about raw strength and more about precision, maintenance, and control. Transportation underwent a similar transformation. The steam locomotive didn't just make travel faster, it redefined our relationship with distance and time. Before railways, travel speed was limited by animal endurance and road conditions. With steam-powered trains, distance became something that could be measured in hours rather than days, and the rhythm of travel shifted from the organic, irregular pace of living creatures to the steady, mechanical beat of pistons and wheels on tracks. This mechanical age also changed how we saw our own bodies. We began to understand ourselves through mechanical metaphors, the heart as a pump, the lungs as bellows, the joints as hinges and pivots. Medicine started borrowing mechanical language, describing bodily functions in terms of levers, pressures, and systems. This wasn't just poetic thinking, it was a fundamental shift in how we understood ourselves in relation to the tools we created. What's fascinating about this adaptation is how seamlessly these technologies became extensions of our physical selves. Consider the simple bicycle, a perfect marriage of wheel, lever, and human effort. When you ride a bicycle, you're not just using a machine, you're entering into a partnership with physics. Your body's movements are amplified, redirected, made more efficient. The bicycle becomes less a separate object and more an extension of your own capacity for movement. Or think about the mechanical clock, which didn't just measure time but fundamentally changed how we experienced it. Before accurate clocks, time was fluid, measured by the sun's position, the length of shadows, the crowing of roosters. The mechanical clock introduced a new rhythm to human life, steady, precise, divisible into equal units. Our days shifted from following natural cycles to synchronizing with mechanical ones. We adapted not just to using clocks, but to internalizing their rhythm, to thinking in hours and minutes rather than morning and afternoon. This adaptation to mechanical technology required us to develop new kinds of knowledge. We needed to understand materials, which woods were strongest, which metals could withstand pressure without breaking. We needed mathematics to calculate gear ratios, lever advantages, and mechanical efficiencies. We developed new forms of drawing and representation, technical diagrams that could communicate complex mechanical relationships. Our thinking itself became more systematic, more focused on cause and effect, on predictable outcomes from controlled inputs. And perhaps most importantly, the mechanical age taught us patience with complexity. Early machines were temperamental. They required constant adjustment, lubrication, maintenance. Working with them wasn't just about turning them on and off. It was about developing a relationship with their moving parts, learning their quirks, understanding when they needed attention. This daily interaction with complex systems prepared us for even more sophisticated technologies to come. As the 19th century drew to a close, the steady chug of steam engines and the rhythmic turning of gears had become the background music of human civilization. We had learned to harness the power of expanding gases, to redirect forces with precision, to create systems where motion begat more motion in carefully orchestrated chains of cause and effect. But even as these mechanical marvels reached their peak of sophistication, something new was stirring, a force that would make even steam power seem quaint by comparison. A force that flowed not through pistons and gears, but through wires and circuits, silent and invisible, waiting to electrify the world in ways we were only beginning to imagine. And that is where our journey will turn next. You know, when we think about adaptation, we often consider physical changes, how our bodies respond to new environments, new foods, new climates. But some of our most profound adaptations have been to invisible forces, to energies we cannot see or touch, but which reshape our world completely. And nothing illustrates this better than our journey through electricity and communication, a journey that began with sparks and wires and led us into the dreamscape of our modern reality. In the beginning there was darkness, and then there was Edison's gentle filament glowing like captured sunlight in a tiny glass bulb. Imagine that first light, not the sudden flash of lightning, but a steady, controllable warmth. It must have felt like pure magic. People didn't just install electric lights. They had to adapt to a new relationship with time itself. No longer governed by the sun's daily arc, we began to extend our days, to stretch our waking hours like taffy. I think about those first generations who experienced this change, how their circadian rhythms, those ancient internal clocks synchronized with sunrise and sunset for millennia, had to quietly recalibrate beneath this steady, artificial sun. We learned to live in perpetual twilight, in rooms that never knew true darkness, and with light came sound over distance. The telegraph first, with its coded clicks, a system of dots and dashes that could travel hundreds of miles in an instant. Imagine receiving the first telegraph message in a distant town. Someone would hand you a slip of paper with words that had originated somewhere else entirely, composed just minutes before by someone you would never meet. What a strange alchemy. Thought transformed into electrical impulses, carried along copper wire, then transformed again into marks on paper. It changed our fundamental understanding of distance. Before, distance was measured in days of travel, in hours of waiting, in the time it took news to travel on horseback or by ship. Suddenly, distance was no longer about physical space. It was about the network, the grid, the connections humming with invisible currents. Telephones took this further. Now you could hear a voice, the actual texture of a human voice, transported across cities or even countries. It must have felt like a kind of enchantment. Early advertisements for telephone service often included instructions, as if teaching people a new way of being connected. You had to learn to speak to someone who wasn't physically present, to project your voice into a device and trust it would reach another person. People developed telephone manners, telephone voices, even special telephone furniture, little nooks and stands designed for this new ritual of distant conversation. We adapted by creating new social protocols for these disembodied interactions, and then radio waves. Invisible frequencies traveling through the air itself, carrying voices and music across continents and oceans. Think about the first radio listeners sitting in their parlors with headphones on, tuning into broadcasts from hundreds of miles away. They weren't just hearing sounds, they were participating in a new kind of collective consciousness. For the first time, thousands, then millions of people could experience the same event simultaneously. A president's speech, a championship boxing match, a symphony performance, all received in living rooms across the country at exactly the same moment. We adapted to a shared simultaneity, to the knowledge that somewhere out there, other people were listening to the same words, the same music, forming a kind of invisible community across the landscape. Television took this collective experience and added vision. Now we could see events happening elsewhere, as if looking through a magical window. I think about the profound shift this represented. Before television, if you wanted to see something happening elsewhere, you had to go there. Now, the world came to you. People gathered in living rooms, in bars, in department store windows to watch the same images flickering on screens. We learned to process reality through this mediated lens, to trust that the images on our screens represented actual events somewhere out in the world. It changed how we experienced major events, how we formed cultural touchstones, how we understood our place in a larger story. But all these technologies, telephone, radio, television, still maintained a certain distance from our personal consciousness. They were devices we used, tools we operated, objects separate from ourselves. They expanded our reach, yes, but they didn't fundamentally alter our inner landscape. That required something else entirely, a technology that could mimic and eventually augment the very processes of human thought itself. I want you to consider that transition for a moment. For centuries, we had been creating tools that extended our physical capabilities, machines that could do heavy labor, vehicles that moved us faster, communication devices that collapsed distance. But now we began to create something that could extend our cognitive abilities. The word computer originally referred to people, often women who performed complex mathematical calculations by hand, then mechanical calculators, then room-sized electronic devices that filled entire buildings with vacuum tubes and humming machinery. These early computers were like the first electric lights, clumsy, expensive, and limited to specialized tasks. But like that gentle filament, they contained the seed of something revolutionary. They represented a new kind of tool, one that could process information, perform logical operations, and eventually simulate aspects of human thought. The adaptation this required wasn't just about learning to use a new device. It was about developing a new way of understanding intelligence itself, about coming to terms with machines that could perform tasks we once considered uniquely human. Imagine being one of those early computer programmers working with a machine that filled an entire room. You would give it instructions through punched cards or paper tape, physical objects with holes representing ones and zeros. The computer would process these, its vacuum tubes glowing like tiny stars, its mechanical relays clicking like a vast automated typewriter. And then it would produce an answer. There was a physicality to it all, a sense that intelligence was something you could build with wires and switches. We had to learn a new language, not just programming languages, though that was part of it, but a new way of thinking about information. We began to see patterns differently, to understand that complex problems could be broken down into smaller, logical steps. We started to recognize that many aspects of our world, from weather patterns to traffic flow to biological processes, could be modeled, simulated, predicted using these new machines. It was like discovering that beneath the apparent chaos of our existence, there were patterns waiting to be decoded. But the most profound adaptation was yet to come. Because as these computers grew smaller, faster, more interconnected, they began to escape the confines of specialized rooms and enter our daily lives. And with that came a new kind of connection, not just between people, but between people and machines, and between machines themselves. We'll explore that transition next, as we step into the age where the boundary between human thought and artificial intelligence begins to blur. As we drift further from the Industrial Revolution, we find ourselves entering a new kind of dawn, not of fire or steam, but of something equally transformative, equally mysterious at first. This is the digital dawn, the rise of computers, where humanity began learning to speak the language of machines. Imagine the early computers not as the sleek devices we know today, but as vast, hulking monoliths. They occupied entire rooms, humming and clicking with mechanical intensity. They were tended by a new kind of priestly class, programmers and operators, who communicated with them through punched cards and reels of magnetic tape. To the average person of the 1950s or 60s, these machines were utterly alien. They were not tools for individual use, but distant, powerful oracles, calculating missile trajectories, weather patterns, or corporate payrolls from behind closed doors. Our relationship with them was one of distance and awe. We hadn't yet adapted to think with them, only to receive answers from them. The true adaptation began not when computers shrank in size, but when they began to shrink in our minds. The shift from mainframes to mini-computers and eventually to the personal computer represented a profound psychological transformation. It was the moment the oracle was brought down from the temple and placed on a desk, in a home, within arm's reach. This required a new set of cognitive skills. We had to learn abstraction, the ability to think of a machine not just as a physical object of wires and transistors, but as a system of logic, of inputs and outputs, of software and files. We had to develop procedural thinking, breaking down complex tasks into step-by-step instructions a machine could follow. Think of it like learning to cook from a precise recipe for the first time, after a lifetime of intuitive taste-as-you-go cooking. The computer demanded a new kind of precision in our thought. This adaptation reshaped the very landscape of work. The typewriter clatter began to fade, replaced by the softer tap of keyboards. Filing cabinets full of paper gave way to directories and databases on spinning disks. A new literacy emerged, digital literacy. It was no longer enough to just read and write. One had to navigate menus, understand file structures, and command software. The workplace became quieter in some ways, more internal. The focus shifted from physical manipulation of objects to the mental manipulation of information. The white-collar worker was now, in essence, an information gardener, tending to spreadsheets, documents, and emails that grew in the fertile electric soil of the computer. Education, too, was transformed. Remember the computer labs of the 80s and 90s? Rows of beige boxes with glowing green or amber monitors. They were gateways. Learning shifted from pure memorization to include problem solving within a structured, logical environment. Programming classes introduced children to a new kind of creativity. The creativity of building something from pure logic, of making a machine dance to the tune of your code. Educational software turned learning into an interactive experience. A student could dissect a virtual frog, simulate a chemistry experiment, or travel through a historical timeline with a click. The computer became a patient, infinite tutor, offering a sandbox for trial and error without real-world consequences. Perhaps most subtly, computers began to reshape our patterns of social interaction even before the internet connected them all. The personal computer was often a solitary device, leading to concerns about isolation. But it also created new, shared cultures. Enthusiasts formed user groups, exchanging tips and software on floppy disks. Bulletin board systems, or BBSs, allowed people to dial in with their modems and leave messages, download files, and play text-based games with others in their city or across the country. It was a slow, local, and deeply curious form of connection. The social adaptation was learning to build community not around geography or immediate presence, but around shared interest and digital exchange. We were learning to see the screen not just as a display, but as a window. The rhythm of life acquired a new digital pulse. Saving your work, backing up your files, waiting for a program to load from a disk drive with a comforting whir. These became the small rituals of the digital age. We adapted to a new kind of patience, the patience of progress bars and system prompts. And with that patience came a new kind of agency. For the first time, an individual could own a tool of immense computational power. They could write a novel, balance their finances, compose music, or design a house plan. The computer democratized capabilities that were once the domain of large institutions or specialized professionals. So, as the 20th century drew to a close, humanity had made another remarkable adaptation. We had learned to think in binaries and algorithms. We had internalized the logic of the machine, making it a seamless extension of our own cognitive processes. The computer stopped being a mysterious oracle and became a familiar desk lamp, a trusted companion for thought and creation. But this was merely the foundation, the individual instrument tuning up. Because very soon these millions of individual computers would begin to whisper to each other. They would be connected by invisible threads of data, creating a network far greater than the sum of its parts. The age of the standalone machine was ending, and a vast interconnected conversation was about to begin. Imagine, if you will, a single strand of light. A fragile thread glowing in the darkness, connecting two distant points. Now imagine millions, billions of such threads, weaving themselves into a tapestry that wraps itself around our entire planet. This is what happened to humanity as we wove together the greatest network ever created, a web of digital light that came to be known as the Internet. Think back, if you can, to a time before this web existed, a time when knowledge was stored in physical places, libraries, filing cabinets, the minds of experts who had to be sought out in person. If you wanted to learn about ancient Rome, you went to a library. If you needed medical advice, you visited a doctor. The pathways to information were straight and narrow, like walking down a single hallway with doors on either side. Then something remarkable began. Scientists and researchers started connecting their computers together, creating what they called a network of networks. At first, it was like building a small bridge between two islands, just enough to allow messages to pass back and forth. Then they built more bridges, connecting more islands, until what had been separate continents of information began to merge into a single landmass. This network grew slowly at first, a quiet revolution happening in university labs and research centers. It was like watching a spider begin its web, first a few anchor threads, then the radial lines, then the spiraling connections that fill in all the spaces in between. And just as a spider's web catches insects, this new web began to catch something far more valuable: human knowledge, creativity, and communication. You might remember the sound, that distinctive, almost musical sequence of beeps and static as a modem connected you to this growing network. It was the sound of your computer reaching out across telephone lines, finding its place in this expanding web. And once connected, you found yourself in a strange new world of text, where communities formed around shared interests rather than geographical proximity. People discussed everything from philosophy to fan fiction in these digital spaces, creating what felt like magical gathering places where distance meant nothing and ideas meant everything. Then came the World Wide Web, a layer of beauty laid over the functional network. Suddenly, this web of connections became a web of pages, interlinked documents that could contain not just text but images, sounds, even simple animations. It was like someone had taken all the books in every library in the world, torn out all the pages, and then reconnected them with invisible threads of reference and association. You could follow a thread from a page about ancient astronomy to a page about modern space exploration, from a recipe for sourdough bread to the history of wheat cultivation in Mesopotamia. This web grew at an astonishing pace, faster than any technology humanity had ever created before. Within just a few years, it went from being a tool for researchers to something that began to touch every aspect of our lives. It was as if we had collectively decided to build a second world, a mirror world made of information, and we poured our collective knowledge, our art, our commerce, our very identities into this new creation. And then came the social layer. The web became more than just pages to read. It became a place to connect, to share, to build relationships. Social media platforms emerged like digital town squares, each with its own architecture, its own customs, its own ways of being together. We learned to present ourselves in these spaces, crafting digital identities that were sometimes extensions of our physical selves, sometimes entirely new creations. We learned the delicate dance of sharing and privacy, of connection and boundaries, in this new public square that was always open, always accessible. This global network changed how we think about community. Suddenly, your community wasn't just the people who lived near you. It was the people who thought like you, who shared your passions, your questions, your struggles. People with rare medical conditions could find each other across continents. Artists working in obscure mediums could create galleries that reached audiences they never could have imagined. Activists could organize across borders. The very idea of local began to expand, to become something more fluid, more based on affinity than geography. But this network also changed our relationship with information itself. For all of human history, information had been scarce. You had to seek it out, work to find it, sometimes travel great distances to access it. Now, suddenly, information became abundant, overwhelmingly so. We went from having too little information to having more than we could possibly process. Our challenge shifted from finding information to filtering it, from accessing knowledge to discerning what knowledge was true, valuable, relevant. This network also began to change our sense of time. Before, if you wanted to know something, you might have to wait until the library opened, until you could write a letter and wait for a reply, until the next edition of the newspaper was printed. Now, answers came in seconds. Waiting became an exception rather than the rule. Our patience, our tolerance for uncertainty, began to change shape to adapt to this new reality of instant access. Think about how this web changed our relationship with memory. Before, if you forgot a fact, you had to either look it up in a physical reference or simply live with not knowing. Now, we've developed what some call a transactive memory. We remember not the information itself, but where to find it. We remember search terms rather than facts, pathways rather than destinations. Our minds have adapted to use the network as an extension of our own memory, an external hard drive for the collective human experience. And what about our sense of self in this connected world? We began to develop what you might think of as distributed identities. The person you are at work, the person you are with family, the person you are in different online communities, these various selves could exist simultaneously in different parts of the network. This wasn't necessarily inauthentic, it was more like learning to speak different dialects of the same language, adapting our presentation to different contexts, as humans have always done, just on a much larger, more visible scale. But perhaps the most profound change was this. The network made visible connections that had always existed but were previously invisible. The butterfly effect became something we could actually witness, a post going viral, an idea spreading across continents in hours, a movement forming from thousands of individual sparks of agreement. We could see, for the first time in human history, how interconnected we truly are, how our thoughts and actions ripple outward in ways we never could have tracked before. This network became a living thing, constantly growing, changing, adapting. It absorbed every new technology, every new idea, and wove them into its ever-expanding tapestry. It became the infrastructure of modern life, as essential as roads or electricity, but more personal, more intimate, a network that connected not just places, but minds, hearts, stories. And just as we were getting used to this new reality of being globally connected from our desks, from our living rooms, something began to happen. This web of light started to move. It began to slip from the desktop computer and find its way into smaller devices, into objects we could carry with us. The network was preparing to leave the building, to become not just something we visited, but something we carried with us wherever we went. And that's where our story continues. It began quietly around the turn of the millennium. A subtle shift. You might not have even noticed it at first. A phone that could take a picture, not a very good one. A device that could check your email if you squinted hard enough at the tiny screen. Small boxes that played tinny snippets of music. They were novelties, sidekicks to our desktop computers. But then something remarkable happened. These various functions, communication, photography, music, maps, began to converge. They folded into one another like layers of pastry until they formed a single smooth, luminous slate that fit in the palm of your hand. The smartphone was born, and with it, we weren't just carrying a phone, we were carrying a piece of the world distilled. We had, each of us, been handed our own miniature pocket universe, complete and constantly updating, and humanity began a new adaptation, perhaps one of the most intimate and pervasive in our technological history. Think about what that device represents. Before it, if you wanted information, you had to go to it. You walked to a library. You sat down at a desktop computer. You opened an encyclopedia. The information existed in places. Now, information comes to you. It follows you. It sits patiently in your pocket, in your bag, on your nightstand, waiting for the slightest nudge of your attention. This reversal is profound. We adapted not to a new tool, but to a new state of being, a state of perpetual potential connection. Our attention, which once flowed in longer, more sustained currents towards single tasks, began to fracture. It became a stream, constantly forking into smaller and smaller rivulets. A notification here, a message there, a quick check of the weather, a scroll through a feed. We learn to live in a state of gentle, continuous partial attention, our minds like butterflies lightly touching down on one blossom of information before fluttering to the next. It wasn't a loss of focus so much as a rewiring of it, an adaptation to an environment where the next important or interesting thing is always just a tap away. This pocket universe also reshaped the very fabric of our social interactions. Remember waiting? Waiting for a bus, waiting in line, waiting for a friend who was running late. Those were moments of stillness, of boredom perhaps, but also of observation, of letting your mind wander. The smartphone filled those voids. Now, we fill them ourselves. We pull out our universe and dive in, creating a buffer between ourselves and the idle time, between ourselves and the strangers around us. Our social worlds became both vastly larger and curiously more contained. We can maintain continuous, low-fidelity connection with hundreds of people across the globe, seeing photos of their lunches, their vacations, their thoughts, yet the person sitting next to us on the train might be completely inaccessible, enclosed in their own glowing rectangle. We adapted to a new duality, hyperconnection at a distance, and a new kind of social insulation in physical proximity. Our relationship with physical space transformed too. A city street is no longer just a collection of buildings and sidewalks. It is a layer cake of realities. There is the physical layer, the concrete, the glass, the trees, and superimposed upon it, emanating from our pockets, is the digital layer. Restaurants have reviews floating next to them. Historical buildings have invisible plaques of information. Friends might be shown as little avatars on a map just a few blocks away. We navigate with a calm, synthesized voice telling us where to turn, rendering the anxious memorization of maps almost obsolete. We adapted to living in augmented spaces, learning to read the world through these two complementary lenses simultaneously. And then there is the camera. Not a separate device for special occasions, but an eye that is always open, always with us. We adapted to documenting our lives, not in curated albums, but in a continuous, ephemeral stream. The experience and the recording of the experience began to blur. We learned to see our world through a frame, to momentarily step outside a beautiful moment to capture it, to share it, to send it into the network of other pocket universes. This constant documentation changed our relationship with memory itself. We no longer have to remember everything. Our pocket universe remembers for us. It holds our photos, our conversations, our locations. It acts as an external, searchable hippocampus, freeing our biological memory for other tasks, but also making us reliant on this digital ledger of our lives. Of course, this adaptation has not been without its costs, its friction. We speak of digital detoxes, of screen time limits, of the anxiety of being disconnected, the fear of missing out, or FOMO. These are the growing pains of a species learning to integrate a powerful new extension of its mind and senses. The pocket universe is seductive. It offers endless novelty, constant validation, instant answers. Learning to put it down, to let the mind be bored, to engage deeply with the physical world and the people immediately in front of us, that has become a conscious, sometimes difficult, act of readaptation. We are learning balance. We are learning that this tool, for all its wonder, works best when we remain its master, not its subject. And so, we find ourselves here, deeply adapted to these luminous portals we carry with us everywhere. They have changed how we think, how we connect, how we remember, and how we move through the world. They have made the global local and the local global. They have given us unprecedented access to the sum of human knowledge and the intimate details of each other's days. This pocket universe is now a fundamental layer of our human experience, as integrated as clothing or written language. But even as we were learning to live with these powerful, intelligent tools in our pockets, A new kind of intelligence was beginning to stir, not one confined to a device we hold, but one that lives in the clouds of data we create, one that learns from our patterns, our choices, our very words. We had mastered the universe in our palm. Now, we would turn to face something different, something that doesn't just respond to our commands, but begins to anticipate them. Something that doesn't just hold information, but creates with it. We were ready to meet a new mind. And now we find ourselves in perhaps the most fascinating and complex adaptation of all, our relationship with artificial intelligence. You know, if you think about the technologies we've discussed so far, the wheel, the printing press, electricity, they were all extensions of our physical capabilities. But AI represents something fundamentally different. It's an extension of our cognitive abilities, our capacity to think, to learn, to create. We're no longer just building tools, we're building minds. I want you to picture the very first expert systems of the 1960s and 70s. They were like the first tentative steps of a child learning to walk. These early AI programs could solve specific, narrow problems, diagnosing diseases, playing chess, analyzing chemical compounds, but only because humans had painstakingly programmed every rule, every logical pathway. The computer was following instructions, not truly thinking. It was as if we had built a magnificent library, but every book had to be written by hand, and the librarian could only find books if you asked for them in exactly the right way. Then came machine learning, and everything changed. Instead of teaching computers what to think, we began teaching them how to learn. Imagine if, instead of giving that librarian thousands of handwritten books, you simply gave them access to every library on Earth and said, find the patterns, see what connects. That's essentially what machine learning does. We feed these systems vast oceans of data, millions of images, billions of words, trillions of data points, and they begin to see connections that humans might miss. They notice subtle patterns in how proteins fold, in how traffic flows, in how language evolves. They're not following our rules, they're discovering their own. This shift from programmed intelligence to learned intelligence marks a profound moment in our technological journey. For the first time, we're creating systems that can surprise us. An AI trained on protein structures might discover a new, more efficient way for those proteins to fold, a configuration that no human scientist had ever considered. A language model might combine ideas from philosophy, physics, and poetry in ways that feel genuinely novel. This ability to generate the unexpected, to move beyond what we've explicitly taught, is what makes AI feel so different from every technology that came before it. Now, you might be using these technologies right now, perhaps without even realizing it. That music streaming service that seems to know exactly what song you'll love next? That's AI, analyzing patterns in your listening habits and comparing them to millions of other listeners. The mapping app that predicts traffic patterns and suggests alternative routes. That's AI learning from the collective movements of millions of drivers. The virtual assistant that understands your voice commands even when you phrase them casually. That's AI trained on countless hours of human speech. We've woven these intelligent systems so deeply into the fabric of our daily lives that they're becoming invisible, like electricity in the walls or signals in the air. But this adaptation brings with it questions that are as philosophical as they are practical. You see, when a machine makes a decision, when it recommends a medical treatment, or screens a job application, or approves a loan, who is responsible? Is it the programmers who built the system? The data scientists who trained it? The company that deployed it? Or does responsibility become somehow diffused, lost in layers of algorithms and data? We're creating systems that can make decisions with greater speed and consistency than any human, but we're still learning how to hold them accountable, how to ensure they reflect our values. And then there's the question of creativity. Can a machine truly create? When an AI generates a painting, or composes a symphony, or writes a poem, what exactly are we witnessing? Is it just sophisticated pattern matching, recombining elements it has seen before, or is there something more? Some philosophers argue that true creativity requires consciousness, requires the subjective experience of the artist. Others suggest that creativity might simply be a particular kind of information processing, one that machines might eventually master. We don't have answers to these questions yet, but the very fact that we're asking them shows how deeply this technology is challenging our understanding of what it means to be human. Perhaps the most profound adaptation we're facing is learning to collaborate with non-human intelligence. Think of chess grandmasters working with chess engines. They don't just ask the computer for the best move, they engage in a kind of dialogue. The human proposes a strategic direction. The computer analyzes millions of possibilities, and together they find moves that neither would have discovered alone. This human-AI partnership is becoming a model for everything from scientific discovery to artistic creation. We're learning that the most powerful applications of AI aren't about replacing human intelligence, but about augmenting it, creating a new kind of collaborative mind. Yet this collaboration requires a new kind of literacy. Just as we had to learn to read and write to navigate the world of print, we now need to develop what some call algorithmic literacy. We need to understand, at least in a basic way, how these systems work, their strengths, their weaknesses, their biases. We need to know when to trust their recommendations and when to question them. When a medical AI suggests a diagnosis, we need to understand that it's making statistical predictions based on patterns in data, not exercising clinical judgment in the human sense. This literacy isn't about becoming programmers, it's about becoming informed participants in a world shaped by intelligent machines. There's a beautiful paradox at the heart of our relationship with AI. The more capable these systems become, the more they reveal about human intelligence. By trying to build machines that can see, understand, and create, we're forced to ask fundamental questions. What does it mean to understand something? How do we separate pattern recognition from true comprehension? What is the relationship between consciousness and intelligence? AI serves as a mirror, reflecting back to us the mysteries of our own minds. As we stand at this new frontier, it's worth remembering that every major technological adaptation in human history has followed a similar pattern. First comes awe and fear. The sense that this new technology will change everything. Then comes practical application, finding ways to integrate it into daily life. Then comes the philosophical reckoning, questioning what this technology means for who we are. We saw this with fire, with writing, with electricity, and now we're seeing it with artificial intelligence. We're in the middle of that adaptation right now. We're still learning how to live with these technologies, how to guide their development, how to ensure they serve humanity rather than replace it. It's a gradual process filled with small adjustments and quiet revolutions. The AI systems of today will seem primitive to our grandchildren, just as the early computers of the 1950s room-sized machines with less processing power than your smartphone seem primitive to us. What remains constant through all these adaptations is our human capacity for reflection, our ability to step back from the technology and ask, what does this mean for us? How does this change how we live, how we work, how we understand ourselves? This reflective capacity is perhaps our greatest adaptation of all, the one that allows us to navigate each new technological frontier with wisdom rather than just enthusiasm. And if we look carefully, we can see patterns emerging across all these adaptations, from fire to AI. There are rhythms to how humans embrace new technologies, how we shape them, and how they in turn shape us. These patterns tell a story not just of technological progress, but of human resilience, creativity, and our endless capacity to remake our world and ourselves. As we've journeyed together through humanity's technological story, from the first intentional use of fire to our current dance with artificial intelligence, certain patterns begin to emerge from the fog of history. Like the same melody played on different instruments across centuries, there are recurring themes in how we humans adapt to new technology. Tonight, let's gently observe these patterns, these common threads woven through time, that reveal something fundamental about who we are as a species when faced with the new and unfamiliar. First, we can notice a consistent rhythm of apprehension and wonder, the initial hesitation before the eventual embrace. Whether it was people looking at the first wheels rolling across ancient lands, or the first printing presses making words permanent, or even the first telephones carrying voices across distances that previously required months of travel, there's always been that moment of pause. It's as if our collective consciousness needs to take a deep breath before stepping forward into a changed world. The hesitation isn't a sign of weakness or backwardness. Rather, it represents our fundamental need to process, to understand, to find a place for the new within our existing framework of meaning. Think of it like standing at the edge of a pool you've never been in before. Even if you know you can swim, there's that moment where you test the water with your toe, feel its temperature, gauge its depth before you dive in. That's what we do with new technology every time. Then there's the pattern of myth-making and storytelling that accompanies our technological adaptations. When we can't fully comprehend something, we wrap it in narrative, in metaphor, in the familiar tales that help us understand it. The fire that Prometheus stole from the gods. The golem of Jewish folklore, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Even today, we speak of artificial intelligence in cinematic terms as Skynet or The Matrix or HAL 9000. These aren't just entertainment. They're the stories that help us process our deepest hopes and fears about what we're creating. We dress the unfamiliar in the clothes of the familiar, because that's how we make sense of things. It's like explaining electricity to a child by calling it invisible lightning or describing the internet as a World Wide Web. We reach for the metaphors we already know to grasp at something we don't yet fully understand. Another recurring theme is the way technology transforms our relationship with distance, both physical and psychological. The wheel shrunk the journey between villages. The written word bridged the gap between generations. The telegram compressed continents, and now digital technology has made the entire globe present in our living rooms. But this isn't just about transportation or communication. It's about how our sense of community expands and contracts with each technological leap. Consider how our social circles have changed from the intimate tribe gathered around a campfire to the larger village connected by carts and roads, to the national consciousness created by newspapers and radio, to today's global networks where we can maintain relationships across oceans as easily as across streets. Each time, technology redraws the boundaries of who we consider us and who's them, who's within our circle of care and who falls outside it. It's as if we're constantly adjusting the lens through which we see our place in the larger human family. There's also the fascinating pattern of tools becoming extensions of ourselves, and eventually parts of ourselves. First, a tool is something external, a sharpened stone, a stylus, a printing press. We hold it at arm's length, both literally and mentally. Then, through repeated use, it becomes an extension of our hands, our minds, our senses. Think of the way a painter's brush becomes less a tool and more an extension of her intention, or how a musician's instrument becomes a voice. Eventually, this relationship goes deeper still. The technology becomes internalized, not just in the sense of skill or habit, but in how it shapes our very thinking. The alphabet didn't just give us writing, it gave us linear thought processes. The clock didn't just tell time, it gave us the concept of punctuality and divided our days into measurable units. These technologies ceased to be tools we use and became frameworks through which we experience the world. It's like how wearing glasses for years changes not just how well you see, but how you expect the world to look when you wake up in the morning. The technology becomes part of your baseline, your normal. Perhaps one of the most profound patterns is what we might call the law of unintended consequences. The way every major technological shift brings not just the changes we expected, but a cascade of other changes we never anticipated. The automobile gave us personal mobility, but also suburbs, pollution, and entirely new social rituals around dating and independence. Television brought entertainment into every home, but also transformed politics, advertising, and family routines. Today, smartphones connect us instantly, but have also reshaped our attention spans, our definitions of friendship, and even our posture. It's like dropping a stone into a still pond. The initial impact is where you aimed, but the ripples spread in directions you never predicted, reaching shores you didn't know existed. Every technology solves a problem, but creates new problems. Every technology creates new possibilities, but closes others. This isn't a failure of technology, but rather a reflection of the interconnectedness of everything in human society. Change one thing, and everything else adjusts. There's also a quiet, often overlooked pattern. Adaptation isn't just about adopting new stuff, it's about creating new rituals, new social forms, new ways of being together. When radio broadcasting began, people didn't just buy radios, they created the ritual of gathering around the set for the evening news or favorite program. When cameras became accessible, we didn't just take pictures, we created the family photo album, the wedding photography tradition, and eventually the entire culture of sharing images as a form of social connection. Each technology invites us to invent new ways of being human together. It's as if with every new tool, we're given a fresh canvas on which to paint our social lives, our relationships, our shared meanings. We don't just use technology, we create culture with it, around it, and sometimes in spite of it. These patterns, hesitation before embrace, storytelling to make meaning, expanding circles of connection, tools becoming part of ourselves, unintended consequences rippling outward, and the constant creation of new social forms. These are the common threads that run through humanity's relationship with technology from fire to AI. They're not just historical curiosities, they're expressions of something fundamental about human nature. They speak to our need for meaning, our desire for connection, our capacity for creativity, and our remarkable flexibility in the face of change. What's truly beautiful about observing these patterns is that they remind us that adapting to technology isn't just about learning new skills or buying new devices. It's a deeply human process that involves our minds, our hearts, our relationships, and our collective sense of who we are. It's about finding our balance in a changing world, about maintaining our humanity while extending our capabilities. The patterns whisper to us across the centuries. We've done this before, many times, and we've always found ways not just to survive the change, but to grow through it, to become more fully ourselves because of it. As we prepare to close our eyes for now, I invite you to reflect that these patterns of adaptation aren't just out there in the world, they're also happening within each of us, in our very biology. For there's another dimension to how we adapt to technology, one that occurs not just in our societies and cultures, but in our brains themselves, in the very wiring of our consciousness. A gentle thought to carry you into rest until we meet again. Now, as we journey deeper into our exploration of human adaptation to technology, I'd like you to picture something with me. Imagine if you could open up your own mind and look inside at this very moment. What would you see? You might expect to find a static, unchanging landscape, a finished product. But the reality is far more beautiful and dynamic. Your brain is a living, breathing landscape of constant change, a sculpture that reshapes itself with every new experience. This remarkable ability is called neuroplasticity, and it's the silent architect behind our relationship with every tool we've ever created. Think of neuroplasticity as your brain's dance floor, where neurons practice their intricate moves, forming connections and learning steps based on what you do each day. Every time you repeat an action, those neurons dance together more smoothly, their connection growing stronger, like a path in a forest becoming clearer with each walk. And when you stop doing something, that path slowly overgrows as the neurons turn their attention elsewhere. Long before we even understood what a neuron was, this dance was already shaping our ancestors. When early humans first began crafting stone tools, those simple flint blades we looked at earlier, something extraordinary happened inside their brains. The regions responsible for hand-eye coordination, spatial reasoning, and fine motor control began to expand and specialize. It wasn't just about mastering a particular grip or strike. It was about the brain physically reorganizing itself to think about the world in 3 dimensions, to imagine the flint hidden inside a stone, to see potential shapes where others saw only rock. Then came one of humanity's most profound mental transformations, the development of written language. Around 5,000 years ago, whether it was cuneiform pressed into clay in Mesopotamia or hieroglyphs painted on temple walls in Egypt, this new technology demanded something revolutionary from our brains: Suddenly, abstract symbols came to represent concrete objects, ideas, and sounds. To become literate, our ancestors' brains had to wire entirely new neural pathways, creating what we now call the brain's reading circuit. This wasn't some special module waiting to be activated. It was a remarkable repurposing, taking brain regions originally designed for recognizing faces and objects and teaching them to recognize letters and words. This ability to repurpose brain real estate is one of neuroplasticity's most elegant features. Imagine your brain as a versatile workshop where tools can be used for different purposes as needed. The same regions that help you recognize the subtle differences between human faces became those that help you distinguish between similar letters like P and B. And with this adaptation came new cognitive abilities: linear thinking, symbolic reasoning, the capacity to preserve knowledge across generations, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to step outside ourselves and see our own thoughts represented on a page. Moving forward through time, we encounter another fascinating example with map making. Picture this: for most of human history, navigation happened through landmarks, stars, and embodied knowledge. You learned a route by walking it, feeling it. But when maps emerged, our brains had to adapt to a new kind of spatial thinking. Now we were looking down upon the world from above, as if we were birds, reducing three-dimensional landscapes to two-dimensional representations. This required our brains to develop new connections between visual processing areas and spatial reasoning centers. Suddenly, we weren't just following paths, we were comprehending entire territories, understanding relationships between places we'd never been, planning journeys that existed first as thought, then as ink on parchment. Perhaps one of the most accessible examples of neuroplasticity in action is what happened when we learned to tell time with clocks. Before mechanical clocks became widespread, our experience of time was largely natural. The sun's journey across the sky, the changing seasons, the lunar cycle. But clocks gave us precise, measurable, abstract units of time. As we internalized this technology, our brains underwent a subtle but profound rewiring. The prefrontal cortex, the area involved in planning and executive function, became more engaged with time management. We began to think in slices of hours and minutes rather than natural rhythms. This literally changed how we experienced the passage of time, making us capable of coordinating complex social and industrial activities, but also creating a new kind of time anxiety that our ancestors likely never knew. Now consider the modern example of touch typing. In the early days of typewriters, this skill was revolutionary. Our brains had to create an entirely new connection between visual symbols, mental language, and the muscle memory of 10 fingers moving independently on a keyboard. Before this, writing was a slow, deliberate process primarily involving the hand. Touch typing created an almost direct neural pathway between thought and written word, bypassing the conscious control of individual letters. The brain repurposed regions involved in playing musical instruments or performing other complex bilateral tasks. Today, many of us don't even think about where the keys are. Our fingers simply know, because our brains have woven that knowledge directly into our motor systems. Even our sensory perception has been shaped by the tools we use. Musicians who train extensively show enlarged auditory cortexes, the part of the brain that processes sound. The brains of London taxi drivers who must memorize that city's incredibly complex street network, a task known as the knowledge, develop significantly larger hippocampi, the region crucial for spatial memory and navigation. These aren't just skills learned, these are physical changes in brain structure, visible on brain scans. The tool, whether it's a violin or a mental map of London, literally sculpts the brain that wields it. Today, we're witnessing another remarkable neural adaptation as we learn to navigate digital spaces. When you scroll through a social media feed or switch between browser tabs, you're engaging in what cognitive scientists call continuous partial attention. Your brain is learning to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, though not necessarily with deep focus on any single one. This has advantages: rapid pattern recognition, quick information filtering, and disadvantages: potentially reduced capacity for sustained concentration. Our brains are adapting to this new environment, creating stronger connections in areas responsible for visual scanning and rapid decision-making, while potentially underutilizing those involved in focused, linear thought. What makes all this possible is the brain's incredible flexibility, especially during childhood, when our neural pathways are most malleable. This is why children can learn new languages with native-like fluency or master musical instruments with greater ease than adults. Their brains are wide-open landscapes where new connections can form rapidly. Yet even as adults, our brains retain significant plasticity. It just takes more repetition, more conscious effort. Every time you learn something new, whether it's how to use a new app or master a new kitchen gadget, you're inviting your brain to dance once more, to form new connections, to physically reshape itself. So as you think about your own relationship with technology, consider this beautiful truth. You are not just using tools, you are in a constant, gentle conversation with them. Each device, each system, each interface you learn is sending a quiet invitation to your brain, asking it to reorganize, to adapt, to dance to a slightly different rhythm. And your brain, in its quiet wisdom, accepts this invitation, changing not just how you think, but the physical structure through which thinking happens. This dance between tool and neural pathway is invisible to us, happening in the silent spaces between our thoughts. Yet it's perhaps the most intimate relationship we have with technology, one that shapes not just what we can do, but who we become. As we turn now from these private neural landscapes to see how these individual adaptations ripple outward to transform entire societies, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of a new understanding. There's a rhythm to how technology moves through generations, a gentle ebb and flow where what's revolutionary at one stage of life becomes second nature at another. Have you ever noticed how your grandparents might approach a smartphone the way you might have approached your first bicycle? Or how your children navigate a tablet with the same instinctive ease that you learned to tie your shoes? There's a deep wisdom in these generational patterns of adaptation, a dance of perspectives that stretches across lifetimes. Think of it like this. Imagine a vast river flowing through time, with each generation finding themselves at different points along its banks. The pioneers, those who build and create new technologies, stand at the very source. They're shaping the riverbed itself, carving out channels where none existed before. Then come the early adopters, standing further downstream, but still close enough to feel the spray of creation on their faces. They're testing the waters, learning to navigate currents others haven't yet discovered. And then, further along still, come the later generations, for whom the river is simply part of the landscape, a familiar, trusted presence that carries them along. Each viewpoint is valid, each experience is real, and the bridges that connect these different vantage points become the story of our shared technological journey. What's fascinating is how our stage of life shapes our relationship with innovation. When we're young, our minds are remarkably plastic, forming neural pathways with astonishing speed. New technologies fit into these developing patterns like puzzle pieces into fresh clay. There's less to unlearn, fewer established pathways to reroute. We absorb without even realizing we're absorbing. For the very young today, touch screens aren't novel. They're foundational, woven into the fabric of how they experience the world from their earliest memories. The tap, the swipe, the pinch, these aren't learned behaviors so much as native languages. Now, consider moving through life stages. As we enter adolescence and early adulthood, we become explorers. This is when many people dive deepest into technology, mastering its intricacies, shaping their identities through digital spaces. We become the bridge builders between established systems and emerging possibilities. We translate for our parents, experiment with our peers, and begin to imagine what might come next. Then come the middle years, when life fills with responsibilities and established patterns. Here, technology often becomes a tool rather than a destination. We learn what we need to navigate our careers and family lives, focusing on utility rather than novelty. Our adaptation becomes more selective, more purposeful. We weigh the cost of learning against the benefit of use, and sometimes we deliberately choose not to keep up with every innovation, preserving our energy for what truly matters to us. For those in later life stages, adaptation takes on yet another quality. There's often a careful discernment. What will enhance connection with loved ones? What will preserve independence? What's worth the mental effort of learning? The technologies that succeed here aren't necessarily the flashiest ones, but those that offer genuine value with graceful design. When an older person masters video calling to see grandchildren across continents, that's not just adaptation, that's technological love made manifest. Now, between these generations, beautiful negotiations unfold. Skills transfer in both directions. Young people teach their elders how to navigate new interfaces, yes. But elders often teach something far deeper: how to discern what truly matters, how to maintain perspective, how to remember that technology serves humanity, not the other way around. I've watched a teenager teach her grandfather how to use social media, while he gently reminded her that looking someone in the eyes during conversation is also a kind of technology, one we shouldn't forget how to use. Cultural patterns emerge from these negotiations. The early adopters often blaze trails, creating new vocabulary, establishing etiquette, working out the bugs, both literal and social. They're the pioneers who endure the rough edges so others can enjoy smoother paths. Later adopters often bring a healthy skepticism, asking important questions about privacy, equity, sustainability, questions that pioneers in their excitement might have overlooked. Neither perspective is complete without the other. We need both the visionary and the grounded, the enthusiast and the skeptic. And then there are those beautiful moments when technology creates new bridges across generations themselves. The shared playlist between grandparent and grandchild, each introducing the other to their musical worlds. The family tree researched together across continents. The recipes passed down through video calls here. Technology doesn't separate generations. It becomes the very thing that brings them closer together. When I reflect on my own family, I see this dance playing out in real time. My father still writes letters by hand. Beautiful, thoughtful letters that take days to compose. I write emails that take minutes. My daughter sends messages that disappear after they're read. Each of us thinks the other's methods are somewhat mystifying, but we've learned to meet in the middle. He'll send a scanned copy of his letter. I'll print out my emails for him. She'll save screen recordings of her disappearing messages. We adapt our technologies to our relationships rather than the other way around. This is where wisdom lives, not in mastering every new platform, but in understanding what serves connection. Not in keeping up with every trend, but in discerning what enhances our shared humanity. Each generation brings its own gifts to this technological journey. The young bring flexibility and fearlessness. The middle-aged bring perspective and practicality. The elders bring discernment and depth. And somewhere in the interplay of all these voices, we find our collective way forward. At the heart of these generational dynamics lies something deeply human, the psychological patterns that shape how all of us, regardless of age, respond to change itself. Imagine for a moment that you're standing at the edge of a great river, one you've never seen before. The water moves in ways you don't understand, with currents that seem unpredictable. You know you need to cross it to continue your journey, but there's that moment, that long, quiet moment, where you simply stand at the water's edge, watching, wondering, feeling a subtle tension in your chest. That's what it feels like to encounter new technology for the first time. That moment before we decide to step into the water, before we learn to swim with these new tools, that's where we find ourselves time and again throughout human history. It's an emotional landscape we've traveled many times, this journey from anxiety to wonder, and if we listen carefully, we can hear the echoes of these same feelings in every technological transition, from the first controlled fire to the artificial intelligence that surrounds us now. When our ancestors first learned to control fire, they didn't just gain light and warmth, they encountered something terrifying. A force that could destroy everything they knew, that could rage beyond their control. The anxiety must have been palpable, that initial hesitation before bringing something so powerful into their caves and communities. I imagine them watching those first controlled flames, their faces lit by flickering light, eyes wide with both fear and fascination. That duality, that mixture of danger and promise has accompanied every technological breakthrough. When the first printing presses began producing identical copies of texts, some feared the very uniformity of thought this might create. When trains first roared across landscapes at unthinkable speeds, people worried that the human body wasn't meant to move that fast, that our lungs might collapse, that our minds couldn't process the blurring world outside the window. Each innovation brought with it a shadow of what might be lost, a whisper of unease about what this new way of doing things might do to us as individuals and as a society. This anxiety is actually wisdom in disguise. It's our collective experience telling us to pause, to consider, to look before we leap. It's the part of us that remembers the weight of responsibility that comes with new power. When electricity began illuminating cities, people weren't just afraid of the physical danger, though that was certainly part of it. They were afraid of what constant artificial light might do to their sense of time, to their connection with the natural rhythms of day and night. When telephones first connected distant voices, some worried about the loss of personal presence, about how these disembodied voices might change the quality of our relationships. Our anxiety about technology isn't irrational fear. It's often a deep, intuitive sense that everything changes when we change our tools, and we're right to wonder what might be lost in the exchange. But then something beautiful happens. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, that anxiety begins to transform, like ice melting into water under spring sunlight. our resistance softens into curiosity. We start to see not just what the technology might take away, but what it might give. We discover that electricity doesn't just light rooms, it creates spaces for evening gatherings, for reading together, for extending the day in ways that enrich our lives. We find that telephones don't just connect voices, they weave a network of care across distances, letting us share laughter with a friend in another city or hear a loved one's voice when they're far away. That initial tension gives way to experimentation, to playfulness, to discovering the new possibilities that were invisible to us at first glance. This journey from anxiety to wonder isn't linear. It's more like a dance, where we step forward into the new, then step back to check our footing, then forward again with more confidence. With each new technology, we go through phases of resistance, adaptation, integration, and eventually a kind of forgetting. We forget that there was ever a time before this tool existed, before it became part of the background hum of our lives. Can you remember a world before smartphones, before the internet, before TV? For some of us, these memories are vivid. For others, they're stories told by parents or grandparents. This forgetting isn't loss, it's the final stage of integration, when technology stops being technology and starts being simply how we live. What's remarkable is how consistent this emotional journey has been across centuries. The anxiety people felt about artificial intelligence in the early 21st century echoes the anxiety people felt about factory automation in the 19th century, which echoes the anxiety people felt about written language replacing oral tradition. The specific concerns change, but the underlying emotional pattern remains recognizable. We worry about losing jobs, about losing skills, about losing human connection. We worry about who controls these powerful new tools. We worry about what parts of ourselves might become obsolete. These aren't new worries, they're ancient human worries dressed in contemporary clothing. When I watch my grandmother use a tablet computer to video call with her great-grandchildren, I see the entire emotional journey in her hands. The initial hesitation, the tentative tapping, the moment of frustration when something doesn't work as expected, and then the wonder. The genuine wonder at seeing a child's face light up from another state, at being able to read a story to someone hundreds of miles away, at participating in a birthday party she couldn't physically attend. Her journey mirrors so many journeys throughout history. The journey from seeing something as foreign to seeing it as familiar, from anxiety about what's lost to wonder at what's gained. This emotional landscape of adaptation reminds us that we're not just adopting tools, we're adopting new ways of being in the world. Every significant technology asks us questions. What does it mean to be together when we can be virtually present? What does it mean to know something when information is instantly available? What does it mean to be creative when machines can create? Our anxiety comes from sensing these deeper questions, from knowing that the answers will reshape us in ways we can't fully predict. And our wonder comes from discovering that these new ways of being can be richer, more connected, more human than we imagined. The gentle truth here is that we've always been afraid, and we've always been curious. These two impulses have traveled together through every technological revolution, balancing each other like two sides of the same coin. Our fear keeps us grounded, makes us careful, reminds us of what matters. Our curiosity lifts us up, helps us reach for new possibilities, reminds us of what we might become. Neither is more important than the other. Both are essential parts of the human spirit. So, if you're feeling anxious about the technologies emerging around us, know that you're participating in a tradition as old as humanity itself. You're standing at that same riverbank where our ancestors stood, weighing the risks against the possibilities. And if you're feeling wonder at what these technologies might enable, know that you're continuing that same human journey toward understanding our world and our place in it. These emotions aren't obstacles to progress. They're the very terrain through which progress travels. And as we stand here together at this particular moment in history, looking at the technologies taking shape around us, it's worth wondering, what emotional journey awaits us next? What anxieties will we need to navigate? What wonders might we discover? As we collectively step toward futures we can only begin to imagine. Now, as we let the profound transformations of artificial intelligence settle into our consciousness, we might gently turn our gaze toward the horizon. What lies beyond the current landscape of silicon and algorithms? What frontiers await our curious, adapting minds in the decades to come? Let's imagine in a gentle, speculative way the technologies that shimmer on the edges of our scientific understanding, waiting for their moment to reshape the human story once more. Think of it not as a prediction, but as a quiet exploration of possibilities, like watching distant stars and wondering what worlds might orbit them. First, consider the very architecture of computation itself. For decades, we've built our digital world on silicon, on the steady, reliable flow of electrons through circuits we etch at unimaginably small scales. But what if the computer itself could be made of a different kind of material? What if we could build with life itself? This is the frontier of biological computing. Scientists are exploring how to use DNA, the molecule that carries our own genetic blueprint, to store and process information. Imagine a future where a single gram of DNA could hold all the data of the entire internet, preserved for thousands of years in a tiny, stable droplet. Or where living cells engineered with precision could act as microscopic sensors and processors, monitoring our health from within or cleaning environmental toxins. The machine would cease to be a separate, cold object. It would become woven into the fabric of biology, a silent, symbiotic partner. Our adaptation here would be profound and intimate, learning to trust and collaborate with computation that is, in a sense, alive. Then there is a realm that defies our everyday intuition entirely, the quantum world. Quantum technologies are not just about making our current computers faster, though that is part of it. They represent a fundamental shift in how we process reality. In our regular world, a bit of information is a 1 or a 0, a simple switch. In the quantum realm, a quantum bit or qubit can be a 1, a 0, or both at the same time, a state called superposition. And qubits can be linked across distances in a phenomenon called entanglement, where the state of one instantaneously influences the state of another. It sounds like magic, but it's the strange true physics of the very small. The promise here is for computers that can solve problems which are utterly impossible for today's machines, like simulating complex molecules to discover new medicines or modeling climate systems with impossible precision. Our adaptation to quantum technology won't just be about using a new tool, it will be about accepting that the universe operates on principles that feel alien to our direct experience and learning to harness that deep, underlying strangeness for our benefit. Perhaps the most personal frontier lies at the intersection of our minds and machines. Brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, are already taking their first tentative steps, allowing individuals to control prosthetic limbs or computer cursors with thought alone. But the path forward could lead to a much deeper integration. We might develop technologies that allow for a kind of silent communication, a direct sharing of thoughts, emotions, or sensory experiences, not with words, but with the raw data of consciousness itself. Or imagine a neural lace, a fine, flexible mesh that integrates with your brain's cortex, acting as a seamless bridge to external databases, translation services, or creative tools. It wouldn't be about replacing thought, but augmenting it, expanding the canvas of the mind. Adapting to this would be the ultimate journey inward. It would challenge our deepest notions of self, privacy, and where the individual ends and the network begins. We would have to learn new forms of mental hygiene, new ethics for shared cognition, and a new language for experiences that have never before been translated. Other whispers from the frontier speak of nanotechnology, machines built atom by atom, capable of repairing our bodies from the inside or constructing materials with impossible properties. They speak of augmented reality so seamless it becomes indistinguishable from the physical world, layering information, beauty, and connection onto everything we see. They hint at advances in energy like fusion power that could unlock near-limitless clean energy, reshaping our relationship with our planet. As we contemplate these possibilities, it's important to remember a pattern we've seen throughout our journey. The initial phase of any transformative technology is often one of awe and disruption. It feels foreign, overwhelming, perhaps even threatening to the world as we know it. We exaggerate its potential for utopia or dystopia. Then, slowly, through a million small adaptations, through trial and error, through cultural negotiation, through the gentle pressure of everyday use, we domesticate it. We learn its language. We discover its true shape, which is rarely exactly what we first imagined. We bend it to our needs, and in turn, it bends us, expanding our capacities and reshaping our expectations. The strange becomes familiar. The revolutionary becomes ordinary, and then we look up, and there on the horizon, the next shimmering possibility appears, and the cycle of wonder and adaptation begins anew. So, as we stand here, between the age of AI and whatever comes next, we can find a quiet confidence, not in any specific technology, but in our own enduring, flexible humanity. Our story is not one of being overtaken by our creations, but of an ongoing beautiful dance with them. We are the species that looked at fire and saw warmth, safety, and community. That looked at the wheel and saw movement, trade, and connection. That looked at the silicon chip and saw a universe of information. We will look at the quantum field, at the biological circuit, at the neural interface, and we will learn their rhythms. We will fret, and we will marvel. We will make mistakes, and we will create wonders. We will adapt. We always do. And with that thought settling softly in the space around us. And so we come to the end of this long journey, walking quietly through the centuries of human invention. We've traveled from the first crackling embers to the silent hum of artificial intelligence, watching humanity in this eternal dance with the tools we create. And as we pause here at this moment of reflection, something becomes quietly clear. This story we've traced isn't just about gadgets and innovations. It's a story about us, about what it means to be human in a world we're constantly reshaping, a world that in turn reshapes us. There's a beautiful pattern here. As gentle and as constant as the tides, we create something new. It changes how we live. And in changing how we live, it changes who we are. Then we create something new again, and the cycle continues. Fire gave us not just warmth and cooked food, but longer evenings for story and song. The wheel didn't just move goods, it moved our minds, expanding our sense of what was possible, of how far we could reach. The printing press didn't just replicate words, it replicated thought, multiplying ideas until they became unstoppable forces for change. Each revolution in technology was, at its heart, a revolution in human connection, human thought, human potential. We often think of technology as something separate from us, cold and mechanical. But look at the long arc of our history, and you'll see it's more like a dance partner. Sometimes we lead crafting the tools of our dreams. Sometimes technology leads, opening doors we didn't even know existed. And in that push and pull, that give and take, we move forward together. It's a relationship of mutual shaping. The loom didn't just weave cloth, it wove the rhythms of the factory into our daily lives. The telegraph didn't just send messages, it shrank the world, making distant events feel immediate, making neighbors of strangers. The computer didn't just calculate, it created new landscapes for our imagination to explore. And now, as we stand at the threshold of AI, we're not facing something alien or utterly unprecedented. We're facing the latest step in this ancient familiar dance, a tool that can think alongside us, process information in ways we can't, see patterns in the chaos. It's thrilling, yes, and perhaps a little daunting, but it's also profoundly human. Because every tool we've ever made is, in some way, an extension of our own minds and hands, a way of reaching beyond our biological limits. This capacity to adapt, to learn, to grow alongside our creations, that might be our most human trait of all. We are not creatures of fixed habits and unchanging ways. We are the animals who learned to harness fire, who taught ourselves to build cities in the air, who figured out how to send our voices across oceans and now our thoughts across networks of silicon. We bend, we adjust, we find new balance on unsteady ground. The anxiety that sometimes greets a new technology, the fear that the spinning jenny would steal jobs, that the automobile would unravel the fabric of society, that the internet would isolate us, that anxiety is natural. It's the voice of the organism assessing a new environment, but our history shows us something remarkable. Again and again, we've not just survived these changes, we've woven them into the tapestry of our lives, finding new forms of meaning, new ways to connect, new depths of creativity. The Industrial Revolution didn't erase craftsmanship, it transformed it. The digital age didn't kill storytelling, it gave it infinite new canvases. And so, as AI unfolds before us, we can approach it not with fear, but with the quiet confidence of a species that has been here before, that knows this rhythm. We will learn its steps. We will find our place in its patterns. We will discover, as we always have, that the tool itself is neutral. What matters is the human wisdom we bring to it, the empathy, the ethics, the artistry that we pour into its use, the fire in the hearth, the light bulb in the lamp, the code in the machine. These are just materials. We are the meaning makers. So as this journey comes to a gentle close, let this be the quiet lesson we carry forward. Humanity is not defined by the tools we use, but by how we use them. By our endless curiosity that asks what if, by our stubborn resilience that figures out how to, and by our deep compassion that always asks for whom. Our technology is not our destiny, It is our companion on the long road of becoming, and the dance goes on. In the quiet hum of the server, in the gentle glow of the screen, in the silent calculations of a new kind of mind, the ancient rhythm continues. We create, we adapt, we grow, and somewhere in the stillness between our heartbeats and the soft whir of our machines, we find ourselves still human, still dreaming, still reaching for the next step in this beautiful eternal dance. And with that thought we can rest, knowing that whatever comes next, we will meet it as we always have, with imagination, with care, and with the quiet courage to keep dancing. Sleep well now, and dream of the fires we have yet to light.